Video, we're going to be looking at tariffs. We're going to look at just the basic definition of tariffs as well as the application and the impact they have typically on a government, on a country, etc. Right? So let's begin with the basic definition of the concept of tariffs. Tariffs are taxes, right? So let's take a look at this very closely. Tariffs are taxes. When it deals with countries, they are called tariffs. Let's be clear on the terminology. When it deals with countries, they are called tariffs. If it's within a country, typically it's called taxes, right? So you pay taxes when you work. You pay different types of taxes to the government when you work. And if you live in a country that has different levels of government, you pay taxes to those levels of government, etc. But when countries deal with countries, and when we talk about international trade, we are talking about tariffs. So let's clear that up. All right, so tariffs are taxes, right? Are taxes imposed by a government. Let's get this very clear. They are taxes imposed by a government on imported, on one hand, or exported goods. This is very, very important. Once again, tariffs are taxes imposed by a government on imported or exported goods. All right, let's move on and take a closer look at this. They are used to regulate trade between countries. What does that mean? It means to put trade in check. It means to have a control over trade. It means to have a trade balance, right, etc. It is used by countries, especially big countries, the powerful countries, countries with economic leverage, to regulate trade between countries by making imported goods more expensive. Now, what does that mean? And how does that work? By making imported goods more expensive. Well, this is how it works. So a country imposes tax on another country. So let's have an example here. So country A, right, imposes tax on country B. And country A says that all the products coming from country B into A will be taxed, let's say, 25%. Okay? They are used to regulate trade between countries by making imported goods more expensive, right? So how does that work? So all goods that come from country B into country A will be taxed 25%. What that means is if country B is sending, right, $1,000 worth of goods to country A, right? The $1,000 now becomes $1,250. Okay? So who is paying that? The importer in country A is paying that. Right? Whoever has imported these goods in country A will be paying $1,250 instead of $1,000. The price of the goods is $1,000. But because of the tariffs of 25% imposed by country A on country B, it becomes $1,250. It is paid by the importer, the person in country A that wants those goods, pay this much money. And then what happens to the $250? That goes to the government of country A. That's how governments make money. That's how they put the price of the commodity high, make it more expensive. Because if the importer is paying an additional $250, guess who's paying that money? It's going to be the consumers. It's going to be those that will purchase those goods. Now, there are two ways this can be absorbed. They can pass it on to the consumer, or they can reduce their prices to get less profit. Which option would they take most likely? We'll take the first option. Pass it to the consumer. Let the consumer pay the price. All right. So they are used to regulate trade between countries by making imported goods more expensive, which can protect domestic industries. How does that work? How does it protect domestic industries? Well, if the importer in country A has to pay 25% more for their goods they're importing, they may not import anymore. They may just look within the country. They may just look within the country and buy locally or go elsewhere where the goods are cheaper, right? That is how it protects the industries of a country from foreign competition. So you want to make sure that you're looking within your country for cheaper goods. Cheaper goods don't mean less quality typically. It just means that it's cheaper, it's produced locally, and because it's produced locally, there are no duties attached to them and so forth, etc. Right? So that is one of the reasons for tariffs, to encourage importers to look inward. Shop within the country, buy local products, sell local products, by making the cost of imported products a bit more expensive, right? And that is tariffs. And what impact does it have on country B then? Because country B is not paying, right? The exporter is not paying the tariffs. The exporter, exports it, gets their profit, and walks away. But the idea here then is, if the importer is paying a lot more money for goods from country B, then they may not buy from country B anymore. They may reduce the quantity from country B, etc. That is one way of using tariffs to discourage importations. It can protect domestic industries from foreign competition. Tariffs can also serve as a source of revenue for governments. We just talked about how that happens, because the balance of $250 that the importer in country A pays, goes to the government of country A. Goes to the government of country A. That's how it makes money for governments. That's how it becomes revenue for governments. That's how governments enrich themselves, and they can use it as to balance trade. If there's imbalance of trade between two countries, that is, one country is importing more than the other, then they can use that to balance trades. Very important point here. Tariffs can also serve as a source of revenue. Very important point. So looking at this then closely, it says here, and I want to touch on this point, it says here that tariffs are used to protect domestic industries from foreign competition. Again, the way that happens is when the cost of goods are higher, when the cost of goods, imported goods, are higher because of tariffs, consumers will look towards locally produced goods, right? So if a business is selling imported goods, and imported goods are selling for, say, $100, and domestic goods are selling for $75, they will go for the domestic goods. And the imported goods are selling for $100 because of the tariffs, because the person selling those goods will have to add the cost of the tariffs to the goods, to the price of the goods, right? And consumers are likely to go for the less expensive goods. So let's take a look at different types of tariffs. There are two main tariffs that we're going to discuss here. The first one is ad valorem tariffs. Ad valorem tariffs. These are calculated as a percentage of the value of the imported goods. A percentage of the value of the imported goods. So depending on the cost of the imported goods, they tag on a percentage. If the cost of the imported goods, say, is $100,000, and the tariffs T equals to 10%, well then it's going to be $10,000, right? $10,000 in tariffs. So depending on the value of the goods, the tariff is applied to that value, and then whatever it comes to, in this example, is $10,000. That is the tariff that is paid. Very important for us to understand this, because there are two types here. The first one is ad valorem tariffs, which is a percentage of the value of the imported goods. The second one is specific tariffs. These are fixed fees based on the quantity of goods, such as a set amount per ton, right? So this is based on per ton, the weight per unit, whatever the case may be. Tariffs can influence prices. When importers are paying more, they pass the cost to the consumers. Okay, it makes perfect sense. You may not like it, but it makes perfect sense. So they influence price, the trade volume, right? So again, importers can buy reduced volume because of tariffs, right? And that could impact the availability of products within the market. So trade volumes and the overall economy as well, right? Because if the price is going high, well, there's little activity. Not a lot of people will go out there and get commodities at a high price. If trade volumes are down, well, that means supply is down. and that has an impact on the overall economy. They are often a point of contention in international trade. So countries always impose tariffs on other countries, and that's a point of contention. Typically, in international trade, sometimes it can lead to a trade war. Countries use it to balance trade. If one country is importing more than the other, sometimes tariffs are used to get their attention and say you have to do it right, and countries go back to the negotiating table. It's used for a number of reasons. Sometimes it can be used as an economic muscle against another country to get something political, to get something economical, to balance our trade. It can be used by a country as a foreign policy tool as well. So tariffs are very important in the grand scheme of things. It has become a tool that countries use to gain advantage over other countries. So this is tariffs. Two types of tariffs, ad valorem and specific tariffs. Ad valorem is based on percentage, specific tariffs based on per unit or per ton. Tariffs are taxes that are imposed by a government on imported goods and exported goods. They are used to regulate trade between countries by making imported goods more expensive. When they tag on tariffs on imported goods, they become more expensive because the tariffs are passed on to the consumer. And they are also used to protect domestic industries. And the way that happens is the importer sometimes will look inward and say, wait a minute, the goods are becoming more expensive. The tariffs are beyond my means. I'm going to look locally. I'm going to buy locally. I'm going to support the local industry. And sometimes that protects the local industry from foreign competition. Tariffs can also serve as a source of revenue for governments. The 25% tariffs, for example, or 10% tariffs, for example, that goes to the government. That goes to the government. It is paid by the importer to the government. So tariffs in one way or the other has an impact on the country that is imposing the tariffs because it will increase the price of commodity in that country. Sometimes the country has an end goal. Sometimes the country can look at it differently, can say, yes, it's going to increase the price of commodities in this country, but in the long run, it will discourage importation and encourage domestic consumption of products.